our virtual Plan Commission meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking on the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. The chair, clerk, and technical facilitator are responsible for muting and unmuting committee members. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. During any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted briefly. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which their hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the commission, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesse. First, we'll have communications, disclosures, and recusals. Members of the body should make any required disclosures or recusals under the city's ethics code. Alder Lemmer.
Thank you. I need to recuse myself from item 6.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next would be public comment, and I don't see that we have any registrants for public comment. Is that correct, Heather? Okay. Then moving on to the minutes of our February 7th meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing no raised hands, is there a motion to approve? Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. We will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. As for upcoming meetings, we have a meeting on March 7th, March 21st, April 11th, and April 25th. All of those are at 5:30. And then we do have a special meeting, working session, scheduled for Thursday, March 24th, and that meeting will be at 5 o'clock. Okay. The next items on our agenda, well, first I think I'll go to the consent agenda and then back to the special items of business. On the consent agenda, which does include referrals, the first item is agenda item 4, which would be for a referral. Then also agenda item 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And those would be on the consent agenda. On the consent agenda, we have things that staff believe the applicant has had sufficient review to warrant approval with all of the conditions placed upon it by the various city departments, on which the applicant accepts those conditions, and on which there are no individuals who are registered to speak. So those items are at the beginning. Are there any requests for separation of any of those items to take them off of the consent agenda? Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you, Chair Zell. This is just a question. Is 5 on the consent agenda?
Yes, it is on the consent agenda. Heather sent out a memo a bit before our meeting indicating that it had been added to the consent agenda.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, seeing no requests for separation, I will read the items which are on the consent agenda into the record. And again, agenda item 4 is for referral to a future meeting date with no date specified. Then on consent is agenda item 5, Legistar 69314, located at 2206 through 2208 University Avenue, 5th Alder District, conditional use in the traditional shopping street district for a mixed-use building with less than 50% non-residential ground floor facing the primary street, consideration of a conditional use in the TSS district for a mixed-use building with greater than 48 dwelling units, consideration of a conditional use in the TSS district for a building taller than 3 stories and 40 feet, and consideration of a conditional use for a reduction of more than 20 spaces and 25% or more of the required automobile parking to allow construction of a 6-story mixed-use building with approximately 800 square feet of commercial space and 79 apartments. Also, agenda item 6, Legistar 6935, located at 3005 University Avenue, 5th Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a restaurant tavern. And then agenda items 7 and 8 are related, and they are Legistar 69317 and Legistar 69318, approving a certified survey map of property owned by the City of Madison at 5426 Fen Oak Drive, 16th Alder District, and also consideration of a conditional use at the same location in the Suburban Employment District for warehousing and storage to allow construction of an office warehouse distribution facility for the South Central Library System. And agenda item 9, Legistar 69316, adjacent to 2862 Sigelcow Road, Town of Cottage Grove, consideration of a certified survey map within the city's extraterritorial jurisdiction to create 1 residential lot and 1 lot for farmland preservation. Okay, I will open the public hearing on those, and then since there are no registrants wishing to speak, close the public hearing. Is there a motion to approve on the consent agenda? Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim. And we will come to a vote on the consent agenda unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion does pass unanimously. Okay, moving back then to agenda item 2, Legistar 69352, staff update on Housing Forward Initiative. And I believe, Heather, you are going to be taking that one.
Yes, thank you so much, Chair Zellers. I will pull up the slides here that have been shared on the Legistar site. And first want to thank colleagues across planning, community, and economic development, and particularly Lynette Rhodes, who leads the city's community development block grant section, for putting these slides together. What we're doing as a staff team is bringing these to the committees that have been involved in moving the Housing Forward agenda over the past year, just to provide an update to those committees. And as you all know, the Plan Commission has been deeply involved in some elements of that. I think, I'll certainly have a little bit more knowledge of the detail and background on the things that we as planning staff and the Plan Commission have been involved in. But it's important, I think, to see that bigger picture. If you'll recall, when we were working together on zoning ordinance changes to impact the ease of housing production, there were a lot of questions by the Commission and also the Common Council regarding other tools in the city's toolbox, funding, land banking. How do these things all fit together? And so we'll go into some detail on updates on those other elements of the toolbox that the Plan Commission isn't as directly involved with. And if there are questions that I can't answer, I will certainly say so, and we'll get those down. Colin can assist with that, and we'll make sure to get answers back to the commissioners on those. So just as a quick reminder, over the past decade, we've seen many housing-related recommendations come through the city in a variety of reports, formal and informal, over 100 housing recommendations that we really tried to capture working closely with the mayor in the Housing Forward Plan. This is a list of a few of the highlights over the past decade. So back in 2013, the city created the Housing Strategy Committee. Shortly thereafter, the Affordable Housing Fund was created. And the goal at that time under former Mayor Soglin was for the city to support the creation of 1,000 affordable rental units in the next 5 years. To date, the city has dedicated $33 million to that effort and created nearly 1,500 long-term affordable housing units at this time. Some are still under construction or will soon be under construction. Among those, the Recusals Terrace and the Tree Lane apartments were the permanent supportive housing projects for families and individuals who formerly were experiencing homelessness. So those were both constructed in 2015 and 2017. In 2016, the city worked to amend our park impact fee policy and basically waive park impact fees for housing units that were pledging to be affordable in the long term, and had an agreement with the city to maintain long-term affordability. Just in 2020, the city released the first Housing Forward request for proposals. And as many of you know, a lot of the affordable housing projects that the Plan Commission sees and the city supports through funding have been quite large-scale projects. Housing Forward is different from that. It's a way for the city to support smaller scale projects that aren't seeking WIDA tax credits. And we committed about $3 million in rental and owner-occupied developments in 2020. That RFP has just been recently released again this year. And then finally, on the list here, the creation of the city's land banking fund was done in 2020. And this is just a snapshot of really focusing on these three categories and how the city supports them financially. So a really strong focus on our most vulnerable, those experiencing homelessness. City support comes in the form of supporting permanent supportive housing, like I mentioned, Tree Lane and Recusals, and also temporary emergency shelters for both men and for families. And then finally, services around folks that are experiencing homelessness, and to the tune of about $2 million annually. With regard to rental, the middle category, the Affordable Housing Fund is the largest pot. We're looking at about $7 million annually, recently approved in the city's 2022 budget. But then, plenty of funding coming from the Federal Home and Community Development Block Grant Program as well. And then our Community Development Authority runs the Section 8 program, providing household vouchers, about 1,800 vouchers at any one time. And then finally, continuing to manage our 1,000 Community Development Authority owned and managed public housing units as well. And then finally, at the other end of the spectrum, really focusing on promoting home ownership and the opportunities to build household wealth. The city is providing about $2.5 million annually in down payment assistance to those who qualify, and then also support for nonprofit developers of affordable homeownership possibilities, about $1 million annually. And then importantly, for folks who do have a lot of equity in their home, but not a lot of income, so not exclusively older homeowners, but certainly they often fall within that category. The city does provide rehabilitation funding, so for energy and other needs, energy efficiency needs, about $1.7 million annually for those who qualify for the rehabilitation program. The Mayor's Housing Forward initiative really is a 5-point plan, and you'll see there are minor bullet points within each piece, but we're working to increase housing choice, which the Plan Commission has been very closely involved in, creating affordable housing throughout the city, combating displacement and segregation, which has been a very strong thread of conversation recently, certainly with the South Madison plan, but also as we prepare for bus rapid transit, making sure that we're getting ahead of likely displacement of residents and businesses as well. Finally, ensuring seniors and others can stay in their homes and continuing to work to end homelessness through a variety of measures. We'll go through each one of these. And again, please, I'll try to keep this as brief as possible, but use this as a reference. Feel free to follow up with questions to me, and I can get the answers as they come up. On each of these slides, the goals outlined in Housing Forward are the top 3 bullets in each slide. And then under those, it's a quick look at the actions that are completed, and those are shown with a check mark beside them, and actions that are either currently underway or are a next step are shown below the checkmarked items with a bullet next to them. So again, this is the slide that I think the Plan Commission's most familiar with. The city has adopted a zoning ordinance last summer to allow more housing to occur as a permitted use. We've adopted a zoning ordinance as a city to allow accessory dwelling units as a permitted use. Even before that, adopted a brand new zoning district, the regional mixed use district, for use in our mixed use outside of downtown, high intensity development and redevelopment areas. And then finally, one thing that we're right in the midst of now is continuing to work on proactive rezoning to match our future plans. And a great example that will be before you at your next meeting is a batch of rezonings in the Oscar Mayer Special Area Plan. And you'll recall it as the Odan Plan and East Town Plan were before you. That was a part of the discussion, which high priority sites should be proactively rezoned, so that basically takes away part of the process that developers need to take on themselves, and makes it a little bit easier to move forward with housing that's actually planned for these areas. Creating affordable housing throughout the city. Again, these first 3 are the goals that were listed within the Housing Forward initiative. Currently, here's where we are with regard to what's done and what's in process. Continuing to invest heavily in affordable housing development projects and increasing the affordable housing fund. Again, it started at about $3 or $4 million a year. Now it's about $7 million a year. We're really focusing affordable housing applications to prioritize strong transit access. And that's evident in a map that is basically sent out each year with the city's affordable housing fund request for proposals. And on that map, there are super preferred areas that are our highest transit capacity and frequency areas. We're really trying to drive that investment in affordable housing in places where it's easiest to get around and reach multiple destinations. We have a $1 million fund and policy for land banking. Now, $1 million doesn't get us much these days with regard to purchasing land. And so this is something that not only do we have the annual fund for land banking, but also we're able to utilize tax increment financing to proactively purchase land. And that will probably end up being a source of funds to help that go a little further. We've simplified the permitting process for demolitions. So that whenever the city is funding an affordable housing project and the Landmarks Commission has said that there's no concern about the existing building on the site, it's not historically significant, that particular project, the demolition piece of it would not need Plan Commission approval. We haven't experienced one of those yet, but that's something that we hope can come into play with the smaller scale affordable housing projects that we're working to fund. And finally, a team of city staff is working on with a group called Change Lab, and that's a Bloomberg-supported national group that brings staff from different cities together to share ideas, share solutions. I'm not on this team, but know folks who are. And I think there are other cities that face a lot of the challenges that we do with regard to some of our state statutory limits. As you know, and it can be very frustrating sometimes in Wisconsin, it seems like we get some really great ideas about what it would be great to do around affordable housing. And then we, again, have to remind ourselves that we can't mandate affordability through zoning and things like that. We're not alone in that. And it's been helpful for folks to, work with other cities and commiserate and try to brainstorm solutions that might work. So that's in progress. Just a quick map showing the distribution of the projects that have been funded by the Affordable Housing Fund. The vast majority of these are WHEDA tax credit projects distributed throughout the city. You'll see that, there isn't much happening on the near west side, the one that was on the agenda this evening for a parking reduction. Your item 5 tonight is shown here as number 3 on this map. This map really shows things that have been completed or are underway, or the bright blue are planned and will soon be under construction. And here are just the numbers that accompany that map. And so all in all, if you look at the completed, under construction, planned projects, the city has supported 25 developments. The total number of units is nearing about 2,000. And of those, since each one of these is a mixed income development, a little over 1,500 have been affordable to households making less than 60% of the area median income. There's a range of affordability, typically down to less than 30% to the 60% range in each of these developments. That mixed income spectrum exists. Moving ahead to combating displacement and segregation. Again, some of these things are reiterated in multiple sections. There's a new Housing Forward application process. This is for smaller scale rental housing that's perhaps easier for the smaller scale developers and nonprofit housing developers to utilize. This will be its second year in 2021. And then on top of that, we've created a grant program that's basically looking at the same scale of project, but isn't tied to a particular time cycle. And so sometimes, as you can imagine, it's really hard to get site control, especially for our nonprofit housing developers, but also others, any small scale developer. It can be really hard to get control of a site. And sometimes if you're absolutely relying on an annual or biannual funding process, you miss that timing, you miss the mark. And so the city is trying to increase flexibility around the timing of support for the smaller scale rental housing developments. In the midst of actually that's the third bullet here. We're in the midst of developing that, something that can work outside of that typical timeline. And then one thing that I'm eager to learn more about is the last bullet here, really focusing on technical assistance for homeownership, especially for households with people of color, and the support for more down payment assistance. A goal now is to create support for 125 new homeowners with people of color in the next 5 years. And that will really be focused within the Community Development Division. I won't go through this long list, but it's just a look at who was funded with the smaller scale Housing Forward request for proposals back in 2020. And you'll see a lot of nonprofit developers here and the amount of funding that was provided to them to support their projects. Importantly, not only rental housing, but also cooperative housing was something that the city supported in 2020. Many of you may recall the Jennifer Street application that came through for a cooperative housing and a joining together of 2 existing buildings. The city was able to support that project and another housing cooperative as well. Let's see, 4th here, ensuring that folks can stay in their homes. This is an area that really involves our city's building inspection and Department of Civil Rights as well, trying to work with landlords, landlord-tenant issues, and make sure that we're really strengthening the anti-retaliation enforcement. And this means that landlords won't be able to retaliate against tenants who report things that need to be fixed within their buildings. Many of you may have read the book Evicted and have a sense of how rampant that can be across the country. And so we're working here to make sure we're enforcing that anti-retaliation for landlords against their own tenants. Obviously, over the pandemic, we've had access to a lot of federal funding, and that's really driven so much work across planning, community, and economic development, especially really in community development, trying to basically deal with $22 million of emergency rental assistance to help prevent evictions over the past couple of years. And, that takes strong community partners. It's not always the cleanest process, but we're making improvements and quickly able to look back on even just last year in 2020 and see how things went and make some pretty significant changes to how the eviction protection is working. And then finally, funding the energy and water conservation upgrades within our naturally occurring affordable housing. And so this is a really tricky one. It's something that, as you know, comes up in discussion frequently. Naturally occurring affordable housing is tough because it's not subsidized often by the city. That's the kind of the point of the definition of it. It's often older buildings that may need upgrades, but of course, on the other end of that, once upgraded, the rents go up. And so how can we find that right scale where the city might be able to support upgrades, particularly around energy and water conservation, without those monthly costs going up? And so we're continuing to work with especially nonprofit housing developers and managers to explore that more deeply. And this is the rental assistance program that really was run by the city, both the city and the county. Back in its first year, you can see that about 14,000 applications were reviewed and $15 million were distributed. In that year, distribution of funding only went to households who were dealing with overdue rent payments. And so you had to, in order to qualify, you had to have an overdue rent. And that's no longer the case. It's been opened up a little bit in this Dane Core 2.0, creatively named. Dane County's contracting with a new community partner, Urban Triage, and the City of Madison is working with multiple community partners in this version of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. And I don't know a lot about the details here, but one thing that has changed substantially is that now households up to 80% of the area median income can qualify for assistance, and one could qualify for assistance for forward rent and for utility payments and things like that are going to keep you in your existing housing with a great track record for moving forward. And so that's a big change this year from last. And just looking at the last quarter or so, the city has supported 1,300 households with $6.4 million. And you can see here how those how the incomes of the households, what proportion of households in each income bracket are really getting that assistance, and a significant average funding amount. This will really support, a month to 3 months or more of rent, depending on the household and the housing situation. And then finally, the fifth aspect of the Housing Forward Initiative is really to continue to focus on the most vulnerable and work to end homelessness in Madison. And so, the city as a whole continues to invest in expanding housing options so that folks have choices to move into housing and they have the supportive services they need in order to remain in that housing or to have options for other housing options as a next step. The city and county work really closely together. We're working with the county to continue to develop full service shelter facilities that can help with the supportive services right there that can help folks move into more stable housing, but have that emergency shelter when needed. And then, one of the toughest things, even in a city like Madison with what it seems like thousands of nonprofit organizations working hard on these issues, is that they too need more capacity. Often there's just not enough capacity to provide those supportive services. And so, a portion of the city's effort goes to helping to strengthen those partnerships and partners through education, and trying to support their effectiveness. And looking at some of the things that are on this list, the Plan Commission actually was very closely involved in. The fourth check mark down here, the creation of new zoning districts that would allow for tiny houses, mission camps, and also working on the portable shelter mission in zoning so that it can be a permitted use and allowable more broadly. And so you might recall your direct involvement in some of those changes. And then the establishment of the temporary structured campground site on Dairy Drive was really a response to camping at Rindall Park and other places across the city. And we have a photo or two of that coming up here at the end of the presentation. Finally, some of the things currently in the works are providing some funding for solar panels at the Occupy Madison Village to help drive down their costs, and then continuing to engage with partners so that we have a better understanding of what their needs are moving forward with the folks that they're working closely with. Just a couple photos here of the Dairy Drive site. You'll remember this came to the Plan Commission as just a rezoning of the property to the new Mission Camp zoning district, and has had some positive response really from the community, certainly from residents who are living there for in the short term. It's the first version of an urban campground. These are weather resistant, of course, heated 8x8 pallet shelters that you may have seen certainly on the news and perhaps in person. And I can't stress enough the team effort that really went into this, including our staff from our engineering division, nearly 6,000 hours working on this project to swiftly get it up and running, trying to move ahead of the cold weather this past year. And since Lynette made these slides, she probably didn't add an estimate of her own time and Jim O'Keefe's time spent on this project. But I know our colleagues in community development spent an enormous amount of time trying to make sure that this process went as smoothly as possible. And we really have a great community partner in Mach 1 Health Services there on site to really get to know the residents, work with them, make sure that they're getting the services that they need, and run the place on a daily basis. So looking forward, almost to the end here, what's next? These first two bullets here are integrally related as we look to figure out how we can allow more housing options in our lower density neighborhoods. The first thing that comes to mind is using transit-oriented development as a way to do that. And so we've talked to you all about, what are the strategies within the single-family zoning districts. If you're in a transit-oriented development overlay, could that mean that you could do certainly more than you can today, more than just a single-family home? That's one way that we can make continued code changes to allow for gentle increases in density in some of our lowest density neighborhoods. And I'm sure that we will come up with others together as well. Under affordable housing, similar to the demolition ordinance change that was recently done to allow for city-funded affordable housing to move forward without Plan Commission review of a demolition, are there other ways that we could streamline the permitting of city-funded affordable housing? That is an open question. There's not a live proposal before us at this time, but that's one of the things that the folks working with the Change Lab group are trying to explore with other cities. We'll continue to release the Housing Forward applications and work with the nonprofit housing developers and others that are receiving those to make sure we're polishing and refining that process over time. And then importantly, an enormous effort taking place in the near future is the redevelopment of the Community Development Authority site at the Triangle, and then a much smaller redevelopment on Teresa Terrace on the southwest side. Finally, in homelessness, continuing to work with our community partners on a permanent full service shelter facility for single men. And then also working with likely Salvation Army as they redevelop their site on East Washington for a shelter and other uses, continuing to play a role in that as well. And then I think finally, it's important the city's not doing any of this alone. We rely very heavily on strong partnerships with the county, with the state, with the federal government, with regard to the funding streams that are able to be used by municipalities. And then importantly, just the folks who are on the ground working with residents and those seeking housing. Can't stress enough how critical it is to really support the service providers who are doing the direct work in these efforts. So I think our role as an important partner, certainly not doing it all, is really important to maintain. And so that's a fairly detailed look at an update of Housing Forward thus far. And I welcome any questions. And again, if I can't answer them, we'll get back to you. We'll come to the right folks and bring answers back when we can. Thanks a lot for the time. Hopefully that was helpful to see a fuller picture.
Thank you, Heather, for that good report on what we all know is a very important topic for the city. Are there any questions for Heather? Alder Heck.
Thank you, Heather, for all that great information. Just a quick question on something that came up at the end. Can you remind us what the kind of proposed schedule is for further transit-oriented development changes to our ordinances, et cetera?
Yeah, great question. I think our goal is to have those in place by the end of 2022. And so we hope to bring back to the Plan Commission next month at our March 24th meeting an update on that based on the feedback that we've gotten so far, and then launch into more of a public-facing outreach phase later this spring. And then again, have months still to work toward finalizing those changes. But yeah, our aim is the end of the year. I think it's important to get ahead of especially bus rapid transit because it can take so much time to pull together a property and to get a project going that, we want to have that 18 or 24 months before bus rapid transit is here, where we have the transit-oriented development overlay in place.
Great, thank you. That was my question.
Thank you, Alder. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you, Heather. Just a quick question on land banking. I was wondering if you could kind of describe, that's a fairly recent fund established, but the city does have a handful of prior properties acquired through land banking that have certainly led to affordable housing development. So I was just wondering if you could describe kind of the interaction of how you see, land banking opportunities with our planning efforts. So as we're, developing a new plan for the area, I imagine that city staff is kind of looking at key parcels that would be a good candidate for land banking. If you could kind of describe that process.
Yeah, great question. I think it's such a critical challenge to the city because, in real estate, it's hard for the city to say, hey, here's a high priority for us, and flag that for everyone to know that the city's interested in a certain parcel. I think that in a more general sense, I think that, what we want to do as a city is try to get ahead of displacement by finding properties that are strategically located in areas that perhaps are at risk for displacement of existing residents and try to find, properties of various scales. I think that is newly important. And so not only the site that's going to support a 200-300 unit affordable housing project, but also the smaller sites that might support, a 20-unit building done by someone who typically isn't doing something at the scale of a tax credit project. Now, this is going to sound really general, but I think certainly, we're looking at properties that are in South Madison, and we're also looking at properties all along the east-west bus rapid transit corridor that could be, I think a problem often is, there are so many things, and we want to buy it all as a city. We know we can't do that. And so our economic development colleagues have started to create an idea for a kind of an internal matrix. If it meets these criteria, then it's probably worth that call to the property owner or broker to explore it. But it's such a great question. I think I always have to check myself and realize that the city can't buy everything. But, we do have tools. We have strong interest from policymakers. We have TIF, tax increment financing, that can be used for this. And we need to be strategic and patient at the same time. I think that's a poor answer to your question, but it's, I think that a guiding light is probably, let's get ahead of displacement by taking more of a lead through land banking to really dictate what happens in a certain area.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I appreciate that. As you mentioned earlier, getting properties under site control is such a challenge, and it takes so many years to pull affordable housing projects together in particular, that having the city take that initiative is such a game changer for those. So thank you. That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Solheim. Are there any other questions for Heather? Alder Heck.
Thank you for indulging me again. Heather, this is kind of a broad question that, you may not have an answer, and it may be that I need to talk to community development or economic development folks, but I know this came up in Plan Commission discussions recently when we were considering the South Madison plan. I noticed you mentioned, homeowner related programs for BIPOC folks, and also some other targeted programs that are for BIPOC folks. But I'm wondering if you have an understanding about the legalities that we and problems we face with those targeted programs because of the climate in the state legislature or the court system. There's certainly something we want to do, but I just wondered if you had a general idea about how we can have more of such programs, or are we going to be challenged for the existence of those programs?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I probably don't have a full enough answer. I know there are definitely legal barriers to, an exclusive focus on BIPOC households. There are ways that the city can enhance marketing in certain areas or through certain community partners to really promote programs and make sure that we're using our marketing effort in a way that more people of color will see these available programs, and they'll see that they're qualifying for them. And I think that might be a limit. I think marketing is really the main strategy.
Okay, good. That's good to be reminded of that. I may follow through a little bit more with ED or CDD and try to learn more about that. But thank you.
Thank you, Alder Heck. Commissioner Fernandez.
Thank you. So one issue that came up on the South Madison plan was the desire to preserve a mobile home park. I'm not sure if that's exactly the right terminology for it. Are any of these strategies focused on that that particular goal? How is that implemented, and what, if anything, could Plan Commission do to strengthen that naturally occurring housing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that through the South Madison plan, the Plan Commission and ultimately the council adopted a fairly low density residential land use designation for that site. And that in and of itself helps to set the framework that, this is about the density that we expect to see in the future. We're not expecting to see, 8-story buildings, 5-story buildings even. with a lot of intensity here. And so that sends a pretty strong signal that what's there now is within the realm of, what we would expect as a city to see there in the future. I think more directly, I know that our city's building inspection division is working with residents there to nudge the buildings, the mobile homes there toward more compliance with some of the building code issues that they've seen there. Really trying to focus on ways to work with individuals and nudge things in the right direction without being punitive at all in those areas. That's not exactly getting to your question, but I know there's a very heightened sense of awareness across our entire department about the need to really support that area as it comes into the city at the end of this year. Make sure that there's strong support for what's a fairly large community of folks who do not speak English. We want to make sure that they have connections at the city, that they know the faces, they know the names, they know the contacts that they can get a hold of with questions about their rights, about and I'm thinking in our Department of Civil Rights, we're trying to build those connections. Just making sure that as those properties become part of the city of Madison, that those residents know that that the city has many different agencies ready to support them, and if they wish to stay in those properties, we certainly want to do all we can to help with that. Now, the city doesn't own the property and isn't planning to try to acquire that particular property, to my knowledge, but so that's a tough one. Since there's a private property owner out of state, that dictates a lot of what will happen there in the long term.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fernandez. Commissioner Shepherd.
Hi. Make sure can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just a quick point, Heather. Again, going back to our discussion about the South Madison plan and that sort, and with your presentation, we might want to make more of a point of how linking, once again, housing initiatives with bus rapid transit is actually a positive in terms of combating climate change. When we talked about this before regarding the South Madison plan, some points were made about single family homes and their negative impact on the climate. And some of the research actually points out that the real issue is not necessarily the single family homes. Yes, they can be made more green and that sort, but it's the distance that people have to travel from their suburban single family home to their job. And if you can reduce that, either get away from the single automobile or reduce the distance between where someone lives and where they work, that can have a positive impact in terms of climate change. So I would just suggest maybe to promote that too, because I think that is part of, once again, the housing plan here. There is something here that promotes, once again, having a clean climate and reducing pollution. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Shepherd. Are there any other questions of Heather? Seeing none, I don't think this requires any motion. It's simply an update. So thank you very much. And then the next item is agenda item 3, Legistar 69743, the 2021 Planning Division Annual Report. And I think we hear from Heather again.
Indeed, and I will keep this one much shorter. Thank you for the time again this evening. This is another, what I hope can be a helpful reference to you, and also an acknowledgement of all the work that you and other commissioners on other boards, committees, and commissions have really led on over the past year. And so I will fly through this. What we try to do each year is to really capture examples from all of the services that the planning division is involved with, and really all of the boards, committees, and commissions that we work with. And a huge part of that is the Plan Commission, of course. Starting out, we just have a quick summary of our public engagement that occurred back in 2021, which seems like a lifetime ago now. Ordinance updates, which you were again, very deeply involved in, and we focused really on two here: the housing, creating a more permissible path forward for housing, and also accessory dwelling units. The Streetery project, which has really been a multi-agency effort looking at both public and private property. So things like fire access, traffic engineering, designs that are important within the right of way. Of course, you're most familiar with outdoor eating areas and the things surrounding outdoor eating on private property. But this will actually be before you, the private property part of it will be before you at your next meeting, some slight changes to the ordinance to make sure that the streetery concept can move on beyond the pandemic. Adopted plans, you were integrally involved in most of these as well. The Odana Area Plan, West Town Mall, an update to the Hanson Neighborhood Development Plan on the far northeast side, and then of course the South Madison Plan that we've talked a little bit about this evening. Plans in progress, almost adopted. It's going to council tomorrow evening. And I expect that this plan will be adopted, the Greater Easttown Area Plan. So we decided to go ahead and include it in this last year's annual report. With regard to development review, obviously this is where you spend most of your time as a commission. Over the 2021 period, we approved together as a city 2,800 new multifamily units, and this is the gross number, which means it doesn't include the units that were demolished in place of the new multifamily units. We could easily get that number, and in fact, we will get that number to you. Meanwhile, just about almost 90 new single-family lots. So it was a fairly slow year for new single-family lots. In 2020, we had a really strong year of multifamily units. I think over 4,000. So we keep these reports online as references looking back. I'm surprised that we had still the approval of hotel rooms. That shows a lot of resilience in that market. 92 conditional uses went before you. This is just a breakdown of the types of cases that you saw as a commission, and then a look at the Urban Design Commission and Landmarks Commission as well. Obviously, a lot of these are intertwined. Someone will bring forward a mix of a demolition and a conditional use, or another combo. We chose a couple projects that touched multiple commissions. This is under construction downtown on West Wilson. This building on Charmony Drive and Research Park, not yet under construction. Most of these aren't yet under construction. Recently approved core campus proposal on State Street. This is the one on East Wash and First Street, which is well underway. 800 block of East Washington. This is the Baker's Place project that's not yet underway. And then finally on the far west side, Zor Shrine Place. I don't believe this has started yet, but I could be wrong about that. Outside of development review and planning, we had a year that just so much staff time was spent on the redistricting effort, the Alder redistricting effort that happens once every 10 years. This year it was really compressed because of the late arrival of the census data. And we've got to thank the alders and residents who worked as part of this committee to get this done. They met 9 times in a very short amount of time. And this is just a quick look at the final map that was ultimately adopted by the council. As you've probably heard in the news and otherwise, many alders are facing some really different looking districts. And so we as staff are trying to work with alders to make sure they're familiar with their new geographies, with development proposals in the works, plans in the works, et cetera, and that they can lean on staff and other alders as resources. They're facing a very different district than they had last year. A page about the historic resources, and Heather Bailey, our preservation planner, has put together something more detailed that she shares with the Landmarks Commission. But one of the coolest things, obviously we did not initiate this by any means, but many of you probably heard about a 1,200-year-old canoe that was found in Lake Mendota, and a diving team went down and kind kind of rescued it. And I think it's going to take a lot of time to save it and make sure that, I can't even imagine the steps needed to make sure that it stays intact. But staff, Heather Bailey really was impressed by that finding. It was, I think, the highlight of her year in many ways. Alder Furman and other, I think the mayor was there for its retrieval. Community connections and partnerships. One of the ways we're spending a lot of time continuing this year is really trying to build that community partnership around the town of Madison attachment and make sure residents know that they can contact the city, which city they're going into, who to contact with questions. We're continuing to work on that, and will until obviously late this year when the town dissolves and joins the cities of Madison and Fitchburg in late October. And you'll be seeing, from a really technical aspect of that, you'll also be seeing the proposed rezonings of all of the town property coming in, and those will be moving through the Plan Commission, and just an unprecedented set of ordinances will all of a sudden be in front of you later this year for those rezonings. But really, this is more about building those community connections. Here's just a rundown of the neighborhood grant program and some of the recipients of that and results of that. And then the arts, this is an arena that Karin Wolf just does such a spectacular job leading in the arts realm. And I'm excited to say that we've been able to hire an additional colleague who has just started with the city recently to really support both Karin's work and the work of the Historic Preservation Program. And so now that we'll have a little bit more staff capacity for both of those important programs. 2021, it looks, the Winter is Alive project. There were a few installations across the city that are still ongoing. And then some of the State Street murals have become memorialized as wraps around utility boxes. And of course, those artists have been supported throughout that process, really trying to find ways to support artists whose income has been jeopardized through the pandemic. A lot of great things happening within the arts program. Racial equity and social justice. This is something that's integral to our work. I feel like staff in the planning division, policymakers are constantly really looking at the work that we do through a lens of racial equity and social justice. The city does have tools that we utilize to really analyze plans or processes. And this is just a look at some of the things that we utilized those tools for back in 2021. Continued information about the town of Madison attachment. And then Angela Puerta has been really involved in the task force on equity in music and entertainment. Really, and that's a piece of the arts program, but also a piece of economic development, really making sure that the city is not getting in the way of and really supporting more welcoming places for our whole community, and particularly people of color. Often, our music scene has not been very, very welcoming. And I think there's a lot that the city can do to try to support that. Finally, I think, we spend more and more time, rightfully so, on plan implementation. We work hard with other agencies. We like to report back to the Plan Commission on major issues, but I think we'll continue to really track our plans from our community development block grant plans, which is shown here, to the mall planning efforts, the Oscar Mayer plan. A lot of staff time goes into following up with other agencies, making sure that we're taking advantage of opportunities. Land banking is one of them. Opportunities to create new streets, that's a huge one. And an expensive one at that. But here are some smaller scale projects that I think it's really important that we continue to track so that folks involved in our sub-area planning processes can see those results, ideally in a fairly short turnaround time, although that's not always the case. One of the major plan implementation pieces that will be coming to you, again, at your next meeting, is the official mapping and rezoning of property within the Oscar Mayer plan. And it was a very complex effort, but hopefully we'll simplify that a little bit moving forward. And that wraps it up. but really wanted to, again, just take a second again to thank each and every one of you so much for the time that you put in as commissioners. And it's a lot of time. We recognize that as staff, and really none of this could happen without the Plan Commission and the other boards, committees, and commissions that we work with. Your leadership, your efforts, your questions, the way that you help to shape policy and plans is just absolutely critical. So most of all, just want to thank you all for your continued involvement and look forward to continuing to work on more together this year.
Thank you, Heather, for that update. Are there any questions of Heather about the plan department update? Commissioner Cantrell.
Great report, Heather. I always enjoy reading these to see all the accomplishments that your team has made. A couple questions. The number of single-family houses added in Madison that were constructed this last year, do you track those? I see that you have the number of lots.
Yeah, we can. That's not in the report, but we can grab those numbers from building inspection, and I think, and we can report that back to you, or include it in a future report.
Because we always talk about the missing middle, having also duplexes, 4 units, and that sort of breakdown would, I think, be good as well.
Yeah, I think Colin just came on, and Colin I know that, Colin, you've been working to summarize some of this for media requests and other. You might have it just handy.
Yes, I can get it in about 30 seconds here. 2021, there were 289 single-family residences. Well, I don't know if they were finished, but permits were pulled for 289.
Okay. Great.
That was less than 30 seconds.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
very
fast.
Good.
The other thing, 2,800 really approved multiple family units is pretty incredible. Where are we at on our vacancy rate at this point in time? I'm assuming it's still pretty low, but I'm assuming we track that.
We track it through MG&E data, and I think, I'm hesitant. I think it's hovering around 3% still at this point. There was a pretty major blip when a lot of students left the city during the beginning of the pandemic.
Sure.
And that kind of muddied the data a little bit, but I believe we're somewhere around 3% at this point.
Okay. One other question on the redistricting maps, which I'm sure that was a big effort for your department. How does the town annexation of the town of Madison fit into that? Because that's going to be occurring after these maps are approved, and we're adding 5,000 people within that area, and that's going to be affecting. I'm assuming those maps are. Did you incorporate kind of that cushion or something?
I think I see Alder Limmer nodding. So that was a huge part of the discussion. Thanks for bringing that up with the committee and ultimately the council. And the decision was, yes, let's proactively think about where these 5,000 residents will end up, which districts they'll end up in. And so part of the effort then was to make sure that there were, multiple districts that they could land in, so that not one district incorporated all 5,000 residents. But even tougher was, let's make a very strong effort not to break up populations of color. It's a huge piece of the redistricting effort, is not to break up, populations by race. And so it was, it was taken into account. And so you'll see that some of the districts closest to the town of Madison have lower populations today. And that's with that anticipating that attachment.
Okay. Great. Again, this is a good report. I enjoy reading it. It's very attractive looking too. Lots of nice pictures. So thanks again.
Thank you for mentioning that. I didn't thank verbally, but Mark Fitzgerald is the Planning, Community, and Economic Development graphic designer, and Mark lent a lot of support to the graphic design effort, and Ben Zellers and Brianna Collins really kind of pulled everything together from all of our colleagues. And so those three were instrumental in getting this finished this year.
Okay, good. Good effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Commissioner Solheim.
Thank you. Quick question, going back to the ordinances and the changes that were made last year in terms of permitted uses. Can you remind me if that's being tracked, kind of, developments that are now permitted that wouldn't have been otherwise, just to provide context for, consideration of any changes in the future?
Yeah, we are trying our very best to track that. It's not as easy as you might think, because now that they've moved through as permitted uses, it's us saying, hey, colleagues in zoning, can we scour the latest that's come in and see if there's anything that's, within this range that was allowed by right because of these changes? My short answer is yes. And then we have not seen much thus far, but there's, one example tonight on the larger scale, the demolition that you approved this evening on the Smokies site will be moving forward as a permitted use. It will have Urban Design Commission review, but it'll be moving forward without future Plan Commission review. And then I'm aware of one other early concept that's out there that would be taking advantage of the change as well. I think, we hope to see more happen on the smaller end of that scale, the 12 to 20 unit buildings. And I think we're really seeing that, we need that whole toolkit in order to make that happen. Perhaps the land banking, the funding, et cetera. We're hearing from nonprofit developers, especially, it's really tough to do a small scale multifamily project. That cost per unit is so great that it's not easy. And so we're gonna continue to track it to the best of our abilities. My best guess is that we'll probably need a couple years to really see an impact. But
Great, thank you for that. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Solheim. Any further questions? Seeing no raised hands, is there any general business by members? Then we will move to Secretary's report. And Heather, you are up again.
I'm talking a lot this evening. Well, this will be the quickest of the three. So at your March 7th meeting, the ones I'll mention again are the streetery ordinance change that relates to the zoning code will be before you, and then also the batch of Oscar Mayer rezonings. And you can see that they're shown together on that future agenda, rezonings and the two official mapping resolutions. Moving up to March 21st, I'll just mention two of these. I think the first one on the list, 700 to 740 Regent Street. This is a large, 340 unit apartment building right across the bike path from the Cole Center. I think that will be an item of discussion. And then the other one that I'll mention is 3734 Speedway Road. It's a proposed 4-story mixed-use building, redevelopment of a quick trip gas station and convenience store that I expect will garner some interest in discussion as well. And then on the 24th, we're continuing to refine the details, but my anticipation is that we'll have an update to the Plan Commission on the Metro redesign, and that will be just informational because it's important context for transit-oriented development. So we'll start with a brief overview of the Metro redesign effort, give an update on transit-oriented development so that as we're heading into the more public-facing stage of that, we can work with you again on that piece. And then we hope to also have an update on the planning, the sub-area planning framework. We've analyzed that through the racial equity and social justice lens, and I think that is in better shape than it was the last time it was before the Plan Commission. So we'd like to provide an update on that as well. And I'll continue to work with Liddell on kind of the details of that March 24th special meeting, but expect that it'll be a pretty heavy one.
Thank you, Heather.
Sure.
I think we are ready for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Cantrell. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Solheim, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands to object, we are adjourned, and thank you, everybody. I will see you on March 7th then. Take care.